Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. As mentioned, back with us on the program is Lisa Gibson. She is the Executive Director, Founder of Peace and Prosperity Alliance, author of the book Life and Death, The Journey from Terrorism to Triumph. Lisa, welcome back to This Week in America. It's a pleasure to have you back with us on the program.
Great. Thanks for having me, Rick. I appreciate it.
As I mentioned when Lisa was on the last time, and in the open, Lisa's brother Ken was one of 259 killed in the 1988 terrorist bombing of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. The book Life and Death, The Journey from Terrorism to Triumph is a book about a number of things, reconciliation and about forgiving. And I want to start with that because a lot of people say, we would like to forgive, but that's difficult to do. And your book is not about had answers and easy solutions. It's heart-wrenching pain and anguish. You did not get to forgiving, did you, overnight? It took a number of steps to get to there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that actually is the single biggest question I've been asked as I've gone around the world and told my stories. How do you forgive? Because I think that often we try to simplify it to the point where we don't really validate those that have been hurt in many times in very horrific ways. And so part of the process of moving towards forgiveness is to being able to feel the fullness of the pain and then also to have someone validate that before you can even begin to think about forgiving.
You were 18 years old, living in Michigan, waiting for your brother Ken to return. I believe you hadn't seen him in several years. Waiting for him to return over the holidays. The Lockerbie bombing was December 21st of 1988. When your fears were confirmed because you felt that Ken could have been on that airplane, what emotions did you go through initially? Because most of us will go through a situation and go through initial emotions that we have to later talk ourselves through. What were your emotions initially?
Well, I think the first was disbelief that there's any chance that he was really on that. At first, we didn't really know for sure. We didn't actually get confirmation until about a day later when someone from the military came and notified us. And so, he hadn't showed up. But in that period, there's a sense of denial of that maybe he's out there somewhere else safe. And you just begin to develop these coping mechanisms to try to avoid the reality of what ended up being the truth, and that is that he was on that plane.
You talk in the book, and the book is Life and Death, The Journey from Terrorism to Triumph. The book is available at Lisa's website, peaceandprosperityalliance.org. You can link onto our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and get information. Book is available. It's excellent. You talk in there, you said one thing about loving your enemies. It's one thing about loving your enemies intellectually, a very different thing to walk it out. How difficult was that to reconcile what you should be feeling with what you might have actually been feeling?
Well, I mean, part of the challenge for me is I wanted to not only forgive, but I really believe that foundationally the only way to fight hate is to respond in the opposite spirit of love, and which is why I chose to really reach out in love towards the enemies, the people that were responsible. And, it's easy to think about it, but when you actually concretely try to do that, it requires you to actually sit down face to face with the people that have harmed you and share your heart with them. And it's incredibly vulnerable, especially when someone has already engaged in hateful behavior towards yourself or your family members. But there's so much power in it that I found that is, I really believe, transformational.
When Gaddafi was in the United States speaking to the United Nations, you were one of, I believe, 2 family members to actually have an opportunity to talk with them. This was not without controversy because there were other family members that felt you should not have done that. But you talk about sitting there talking with Gaddafi, and for almost a split second, you could actually see possibly some humanity there.
Yeah, it was almost like the opportunity to meet with him really came about. I personally approached the Libyan ambassador and asked to have a meeting with him. I knew at some point it would happen. I had gotten a clear vision that I would one day sit with him. But when it actually came to being, you never know how it's going to actually happen with someone like Gaddafi, who was really an evil man who did horrific things. And but it was like in that moment where, I was sharing with him my desire to focus on forgiveness and reconciliation. And I actually gave him a small gift. I gave him a cross pen that I saw for a brief moment, his countenance actually softened and I saw his heart. And for me, it was almost like maybe this was why I had this opportunity, is just to see the humanity even in someone who had done such horrific things in him and how far he'd gotten from that, to me was really quite inspirational.
You're listening to This Week in America, our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Our guest on the program is Lisa Gibson, Executive Director and Founder of Peace and Prosperity Alliance. Her website, peaceandprosperityalliance.org. You can go to our website and link on and get all that information. The book is Life in Death, A Journey from Terrorism to Triumph. I'll mention that Lisa will be out with a new book soon. We'll have her back to talk about that. Releasing the Chains, Timeless Wisdom on how to forgive anyone for anything. She's got a blog, conflictcoach.biz. She's now doing conflict training for businesses and universities. All that information at our website where you can get that information. The only person who was ever convicted of the crime recently passed away. And I know you wrote a letter to him years ago. Let's talk about the more recent event where he actually died. And I'm sure people were asking you, what does this do to your feelings? Do you feel now there finally is justice? This whole situation is now closed.
Yeah, he died a couple weeks ago of cancer. He'd been fighting with prostate cancer, which was why he was originally released to go back to Libya. And when I heard the news, actually, what I instantly felt was a sense of, okay, now is Megrahi's day of reckoning. And ultimately now the truth is known, not necessarily on earth, but in heaven. And I really had the sense of maybe now the family members can finally have some closure. Maybe we can just begin to move on. And that was really my hope in the outcome of that.
When you wrote the letter and you said you needed to confront some of these people, you had talked to Gaddafi, you wrote to Megrahi. What did that do for you to actually write the letter? And I believe you actually got a response.
Yeah, I honestly, my desire to forgive him was something I felt like I was supposed to do because of my faith, but I didn't really know how he would respond. So I simply wrote him a letter and shared with him that as a Christian, I need to forgive you, and only God knows if you're responsible. And that was pretty much it. And he actually wrote me a letter back, a very kind letter. And in it, he actually really blessed me and my family, said he did not do it, and actually even quoted some verses both from the Quran and the Bible about his hope that one day the truth would finally come out about him. And in the end, just closed and wished me the best.
You know, it's interesting because many people believe he really didn't do it, and others believed, yeah, he was involved, but it certainly wasn't him, it was others. How did you feel about his involvement?
I followed the trial very closely. I went to the trial several times. I watched it very actively, and I'm an attorney, so I was looking at it through the lens as a lawyer as well as a family member, and I can tell you there was a lot of evidence. And so I had a great deal of peace about the judgment by the Scottish government, despite what some of the other sources have said. But all along, we know that he said he didn't do it. And so I've kind of taken the posture of whether he did or did not, I may not ever know in this lifetime. But as a result of it, I have the opportunity to reach out to people in that region who would see this and say, wow, this person's trying to respond differently in forgiveness and reconciliation. I want to be a part of doing that rather than responding in the same spirit.
It's interesting. We talked in the last program, and since then you've had a couple of experiences once again in trying to reach out and do the reconciliation and the forgiveness. Let's talk about Libya and what's happening there now. How are the people responding? I know you've had a chance to talk with a number of them over the last several years. Are we making progress over there?
I think that there are a lot of Libyans that really do want to see progress. They want to see democracy. And I was actually there in January taking leaders to do leadership training and training in conflict resolution and ethics and project development, all these things that they've never had before. So I was able to actually hear a lot of the discussion of leaders on what's it going to take to really move the country forward? And part of it is beginning from the ground and totally rebuilding and changing their whole paradigm, because they've lived in a culture of corruption with a leader like Gaddafi who's oppressed them. And so they've never had to make independent decisions. They've never had to really learn how to lead appropriately. And so there are a lot of challenges, but I know that there are some strong people that are really committed to that progress. And as such, I'm quite optimistic.
How is it dealing with them as an American? Because in some cases, probably in many cases over there, I'm sure they view Americans with skepticism. What they're getting from what we seek for them is not necessarily the truth.
Yeah, it's been interesting because there's a lot of anti-American rhetoric throughout the whole Middle East. And there's a movement of mostly fundamentalists that despise all things connected to the West, and therefore perpetuating this perception that Americans hate them and want to take over and all these things that are completely unfounded. In fact, one of my friends who's a doctor said to me, he said, Lisa, he's like, we just found out that America actually supported us during the revolution. We always thought it was just France. And so these are the kind of things that we have to continue to help build bridges of understanding about is we have been by them, supporting them, helping them. We're continued to help them move forward in the future.
Life and Death, A Journey from Terrorism to Triumph is the book authored by Lisa Gibson, our guest on the program, executive director and founder of Peace and Prosperity Alliance. Her website, peaceandprosperityalliance.org. Information coming out on her new book, Releasing the Chains, Timeless Wisdom on How to Forgive Anyone for Anything. Peace and Prosperity Alliance actually came about because it's a legacy left by your brother Ken. And I can think of no better legacy than having his little sister going out in the world, trying to make it a better place by reaching out to people.
Yeah, I've kind of chosen to take the road less traveled. Most of Lockerbie family members don't necessarily agree with the path that I've taken, but I could think of no better way to make my brother's death not be in vain than to see something positive come out of it, to see good, to overcome evil with good. And that has been kind of the mission of the Peace and Prosperity Alliance and really has catalyzed me to go to places like Libya and Afghanistan and other countries in the region and to find a way to confound hate and evil with love and good.
If you want more information on the activities of the Peace and Prosperity Alliance, what you can do to support it, the website, peaceandprosperityalliance.org. It's very simple. You get a lot of information on the alliance there and what you can do to participate. You mentioned before about their skeptical view of us, an anti-American attitude. Over here, we have a lot of anti-Middle Eastern attitude. Sharia law is something we keep hearing thrown up now, and it seems like every time we discuss Islam, it's almost in a negative term. How do we break through that? I know that's something you're trying to do, but as consumers of news and we're watching and listening to all of this, how are we able to get through what's almost being set up as hatred or fear?
Well, you think about the proposition in America that at the heart of democracy is government is of the people, by the people, for the people. And that whole idea is so much a part of what we believe in. And it's often counter to the belief system of Islam and Sharia. And so part of what you're trying to do is overcome completely different paradigms. And that takes people sitting face to face and understanding. And a lot of people don't realize Sharia is a legal system that's part of Islam. And Islam is a religion, a legal system, and a culture. It's all things about life. And so they can't really separate the two. And because we have separation of religion and state in our country, it's different. And so we need to sit face to face and we need to create bridges of understanding so there isn't so much fear. And only in that situation where we're face to face, at least trying to understand, do I think that we will be able to move forward in a much more healthy way.
Got a couple minutes left in the program. I want to talk about Afghanistan. That's an area that you're very familiar with. You've worked with people over there. We all are struggling with, do we get out? Do we stay? What happens when we get out? Where are we, do you feel, in Afghanistan?
Well, I was there in September teaching conflict resolution at a university, and the leaders I was working with, many of them shared how much good the troops and the nonprofits have done since coming into Afghanistan. And actually, many of them were quite fearful of what's going to happen with the troop pulling out, and they're already seeing a lot of destabilization of the security. And so I think it's to be determined long term. I know that the Taliban and others are still actively involved in trying to cause problems, but ultimately the people and the leaders that do want to see progress need to at some point begin to stand on their own 2 feet. And so we've got to figure out how to help them do that in the next several years as the troops are completely pulling out.
30 seconds left in the program. When you look at the world and the areas that you would like to go, and you've gone and you've tried to work through with reconciliation and forgiveness, it has to be almost overwhelming. Are we making progress?
I think that I believe that if you teach someone to fish, they're more able to to sustain themselves long term. And that's a principle of going in, teaching them the skills that they need, and confounding the wrong patterns of thought. And so that's the best thing we can do in terms of investment, is going in, helping, equipping them to lead in a much more progressive way.
Lisa Gibson has been our guest on This Week in America, Executive Director, founder of Peace and Prosperity Alliance.org. The book is Life and Death, A Journey from Terrorism to Triumph. Her new book out soon, Releasing the Chains, Timeless Wisdom on How to Forgive Anyone for Anything. Her blog site is conflictcoach.biz. Lisa, great to have you back on the program. We'll come back and talk about the new book. And if people want information, it's very simple. Go to peaceandprosperityalliance.org. And I'm sure you would really like to have them come to the website and to get involved.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're listening to This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network.